Good morning, and welcome to our Conceptual Foundations Network Legacy Archive Project. For the better part of a decade, the Legacy Archive Project has been formally collecting and cataloging video interviews with influential figures in the field of gifted education, building on interviews that were obtained since the early 2000s. This year, the Conceptual Foundations Network continues to highlight scholars who represent strong individual contributions to the field. This collection of interviews is intended to highlight the nature and thought contribution and its impact on research and practice. I'm Joyce Miller, chair-elect of our Conceptual Foundations Network, and we have with us this morning Dr. Joyce Juntune. Good morning, Joyce.
Good morning.
Joyce, Dr. Juntune is a professor of educational psychology at Texas A&M University, where she serves as the program coordinator of the undergraduate minor in creative studies and the online Masters of Educational Psychology program in cognition and creativity. So we have several questions that we would like to ask Dr. Juntune. Our purpose always is to provide informative information that can be used by our audience in getting to know those, as we've said before, made great contributions to our field in gifted education. So I will begin with our questioning with asking Dr. Juntune how she found her way into the field of gifted education.
Well, you have to remember that I grew up before there was actually an official field of gifted education. I was raised in rural Minnesota before we had a Marlin report, before we had those things. But my younger sister was highly gifted, and unfortunately, everything that happened in the schools was the wrong thing, but we didn't even know what giftedness was. We didn't understand that. All I knew is when I eventually entered the school, the profession of education, I remember walking into my classroom the first day and saying, I don't know what happened to my sister, but I vow to never, ever let that happen to any student in my classroom. I later learned it was because she was gifted. When I was in California, I met Dr. Mary Meeker, and she started to explain to me about giftedness. And anybody who knows the history of gifted knows California was one of those states who was doing things in gifted long before other states were. And so I was fortunate that I had gained that information, and I really still look at the fact my passion gifted came because of the experiences my sister went through that were sad for any gifted kid.
So what were the pressing questions in the field at that time?
Well, it was just forming. So they were trying to figure out how to identify them, how to serve them. One of the things early on that I remember that I think is something we shouldn't forget, it was Julian Stanley from Johns Hopkins University. And at one of those conversations, I remember him saying, look, folks, I'm going to focus on gifted students that need to be accelerated. That's not the only answer, but it's one. Now, you guys decide whatever else you want. You decide. And so he kind of did this direction. I think that was important was saying different people need to go after different things in order for us to actually understand how to best work with gifted people.
So how did your career develop over time in terms of your professional role and areas of interest?
Well, I became a classroom teacher, and while I was a classroom teacher, and after I was in California, I went back to Minnesota, and when I was in Minnesota, it was again the beginnings of what was happening with gifted. And to be honest, as most classroom teachers, I was outside of my classroom one day putting things on the walls after the school day. My principal came by and said, Oh my word. I promised to send someone to this meeting they're going to have about serving high ability kids. Everyone else is gone. Could you go? And so I went, and that's when I first became involved with what needs to happen in schools, what parents need to be doing, and in our state organization. And then I moved from there into working with the National Association of Gifted Children to coming to Texas A&M. So it really all started as a classroom teacher and understanding that there were gifted students in my class.
So that was in Minnesota. Were you our first executive director of NAGC?
No, actually, well, NAGC kind of started with a lady who, worked with it kind of out of her house, but that it became formalized under John Gowan. And John Gowan really became one of my wonderful mentors. We were at that time in the school I was in Minnesota because we had a lot of high ability students. Our principal had us working on how to improve their thinking, how to offer options, all these kinds of things. And Dr. John Gowan saw this, and he started to come to our school and he started to visit with us. And when he decided he was no longer going to be executive director, then he recommended that I apply. And so it was an interesting process, but I ended up then being actually the first paid executive director because John Gowan did it totally volunteer.
Wow. So how do you think your work has influenced the field overall, and why do you think this was your contribution?
Well, I think probably a couple kinds of things. So there's really been kind of like three spokes. So there was the classroom, school-based spoke, which I still love, I still work with. And what is interesting to me there is when I see teachers understand who gifted kids are and how to work with them within a classroom setting. And when I see teachers change the way they teach, to me, that's what that passion of classroom is all about. When it comes to National Association for Gifted, when I came into NAGC, there were very few state laws for gifted and very few state organizations. And the wonderful pleasure that I got to witness during those years was state laws happening in state after state after state after state. There was still that argument then that we still talk about today. Is gifted education a part of special ed, or is it a separate law? And different states handle it different ways. But the greatest wonderful thing that happened out of that was not only the state laws, but states started to form organizations for parents and educators and researchers to join together at a state level to try to make gifted education more effective at a state level. And to see those associations grow during those years at NAGC, to me, was kind of one of the blessings of being there. And then in the research area, because I was interested in both how people think, the whole aspect of creative critical thinking, and the looking at low SES. How do we find and best serve the students that have been raised in poverty? And to watch how that research and that work with teachers teaching in those settings has also been very rewarding to me. So I really look at what I have done in three different areas.
Dr. Juntune, you mentioned Dr. Gallagher, but who else has been important to you in your involvement in gifted ed?
Well, and it's interesting because at the beginning, for people who need a historical aspect, we really need to understand that what Bill Vassar and Jim Gallagher and Julian Stanley and John Gowan did in those early years, we really rest on today. But I was fortunate because the field was small that I got to know John Gowan very well. I got to know Paul Torrance very well. I got to know Dorothy Sisk, Bill Nash, Jim Gallagher. So one of the interesting little things is one of the people on the NAGC board years ago was called Juliana Gensley, and she actually served as president one time. And having a little conversation with her in her kitchen one day, I found out that she was actually one of the original participants in the Terman study. And so I always kind of felt like it was so exciting because most we didn't know who these people were. And to realize that here one of those people from the Terman study was actually involved in NAGC in those early years. I'd have to give a lot of credit also to my principal, and when I'm talking with teachers, they learn about Mr. Bronis. But Mr. Bronis helped us focus on students and what students needed and how to make sure we always lift the lid off so that they could go as far as they could go. And so I had that influence from some of the researchers in the field, but I had the influence from an administrator who was there every day saying, go for it, go for it, go for it, go for it.
So what direction or challenges do you believe are most important for the field?
Well, one of the things that's happening now that I think is a real challenge is acknowledging the range of gifted. And one of the difficulties I face even today in working with school districts is often they will label a child as gifted, but they won't give much description about the fact that what level is a student at? Are they a highly gifted child? Do they have special needs challenges along with giftedness? And so we tend to sometimes look at gifted as a single unit rather than a whole range of students. So I think that's one of the challenges. And the other challenge is to keep educating. I remember talking with a dear friend in gifted, and that friend was saying, I don't know why we have to have a basic session about gifted. And I said, because every year some parent finds for the first time they have a gifted kid. Some teacher learns for the first time in their classroom there is a gifted student there. And I think sometimes we forget the power of doing basic education of understanding giftedness to the people at the forefront, the parents, the classroom teachers, the administrator, the counselor. We focus on helping to develop an understanding with those who are leading the gifted programs. But let's face it, there's going to be gifted kids in every classroom. There are going to be gifted kids in every school. And so everybody has to have an understanding of what this is and how it impacts the way that child learns, the way they behave, how they look at the world. So I think there's a challenge to keep remembering to educate that support population around our gifted children.
And what would you have to say to those who are new to the field, those who are young professionals beginning in gifted education?
Well, the first thing, you better love this population and their parents, because what's the thing we always say to people is, if the child is gifted, it didn't come from nowhere. So when you meet that parent, you're going to say, oh, that's gifted, just a little taller. And if you don't love this population, don't. It's not for you. You have to have the energy it takes to work in this field, because gifted children and their parents seem to have endless energy and endless ambition and endless drive. And the other thing I would say is you have to look at the fact that we're not providing, but we're partnering. So we don't come with all the answers. We come with the fact, I'm going to walk with you in this learning journey. And I'm going to learn from you. You're going to learn from me. We're going to try to make this work for what it is you need and what it is I can do. So I think understanding the partnership, which is a little different than other types of education. I always kind of teased people years ago saying, when we have all the answers, I'll leave the field. Well, I'm still here. So the idea that we'll ever have all the answers, no. But it's a wonderful journey of discovering new ideas, modifying existing ideas, and just looking at that we're part of moving along to make a difference for these children.
Mm-hmm. So, what thoughts do you have when it comes to reflecting just in general on your work in the field?
Well, there's always going to be more to do. Isn't that wonderful? There's always going to be more to do. And I think it's important to realize, and I go back to Julie and Stanley, how much that impacted me early on, to remember that no one has all the answers for working with gifted children and their families, and that each person has a piece, and kind of we weave together this quilt of what will support and encourage this gifted child. And that is the field, but that's also in a school. Because a person is the teacher of gifted doesn't mean he or she has all the answers of what to do. They need every other person to also do their piece and do their part. So I think that I look at it as it's a journey. We never get to the destination, but it's a wonderful journey along the way. And we just get smarter all the time in doing it, but we never say we've arrived.
Well, that answer might connect with this one of our concluding questions is the future direction of gifted education and where you see yourself in that future direction.
Well, my passion will always be the classroom, and whether I'm teaching students at A&M who are in teaching in classrooms or in school districts, or whether I'm working with schools, to me that's kind of like the front row to what's there, getting to know these teachers and these children. So it's always going to be the passion. To me, it's about making a difference. And making a difference for that one child, that one teacher, that one parent. Much of my research has always been and will be, action-based, because I like to do it in the schools versus do it in a more of a laboratory type of setting. My mother had a plaque on her wall. She wanted to be an educator, but of course, in her day and age, it financially was never possible. After my mother passed away, I took it and put it on my office wall, and it's kind of like my capsulizes what I think about. It goes something like this: 100 years from now, it will not matter the house I lived in or how much money I had, but the world might be a better place if I made a difference and was important in the life of one child. And that's how I look at it.
Wow. Thank you so much. But do you have any concluding thoughts? That's a great way to conclude, most certainly. But anything else you'd like for our audience to know?
No, it's being in the field of gifted. It's not only a wonderful field. I love all of the professional colleagues I've made along the way. When I was I have to tell you this, when I was with the NAGC and I was doing one of the conventions, the hotel people came to me one time and said, "These are really different people. There's an energy here we don't have with any other group we ever have." And I said, well, there is an energy about people who love gifted people. So that's why I think it's a wonderful field and great colleagues.
Well, thank you very much. And we look forward to future contributions that you make to the field. And we thank you for those that you've already made in building a foundation for us in gifted education. Thank you very much, Dr. Juntune.
You're so welcome. It's been fun to talk with you.